to get started with today's webinar. So thank you for everyone that has joined us and have muted your microphones. We do appreciate that to keep from any background noise from disrupting the webinar and everybody's ability to listen. Today we're going to be discussing communicating in a virtual world with Tony White. So for those of you that are familiar with EZSigma, welcome back. For those of you that aren't, we have been around for over 20 years. We're very passionate and we care quite a bit about continuous improvement and helping both individuals and organizations become more efficient and more effective, because the bottom line is that gives you more time, which is something that we can never get back. So EZSigma has a whole host of solutions and options which we're very pleased to offer to our clients. We've got partnerships with several different organizations for software companies, as you can see on your screen. So Tony White has been working with us for quite some time now. He is a facilitator that specializes especially in soft skills training, and I've had the privilege to sit in on a few of his training seminars, and I've been impressed every time. So I have no doubt that you are going to enjoy today's webinar, that you're going to learn quite a bit. And also Tony will be running our upcoming micro course at the end of the month on essential communication and active listening skills. So if this is a topic that you're definitely interested in and you would like a little bit more information, that could be something for you to consider. So without further ado, Tony, I'm going to pass it over to you. And once again, a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Liz. Appreciate the introduction and welcome everyone. Good afternoon or good morning or good evening, I guess, depending on where you're logging in from. Really is what we're going to talk about. And again, obviously, we're just going to sort of talk about some of the core concepts. We won't get too deep into it just because of the nature of the type of webinar and our timing, but we're really going to look at 5 different areas as I walk through. And one is we're going to just talk, even before the first bullet, we're just going to talk about the virtual world right now and sort of where we've come and where we're going and what are some of the predictions in terms of just the virtual world and will this be around even when this this deadly disease hopefully is behind us. But we will then get into a little bit of the nuances around etiquette, inclusion, maintaining some sort of order in some of the meetings, looking at do we require a Zoom meeting or a virtual meeting every time we need to communicate internally, and a little bit about body language as well. And I'm also going to finish off with kind of a fun video that sort of looks at our virtual world, which I'm sure many of you have experienced in the last 9 months or so. So that's really the agenda as we move through the next 40 minutes or so. So just to start off, I always feel it's important to kind of talk a little bit about what are we seeing from a research perspective as well as from a common sense perspective. And when you look at it from a research perspective, there was a report that McKinsey put out just in October, actually. And it basically did a research, and again, I forget the actual numbers of people, but it was a fairly extensive research globally. And they sort of asked a little bit about business and how it's changed for them and what do they anticipate in the future. And a couple of the interesting bullets that came up is, nearly every respondent that actually did respond, they had created solutions internally, whether it be, how they work differently or who they work with or even what they produce or create. And they'd created them actually quicker than they had thought, many organizations. I mean, obviously that doesn't apply to every organization, but much more quickly had they innovated than they thought they would prior to the crisis. So to me, it says something about the ability of humans and teams when we're collectively faced with something like this, about how we can adapt and pivot to actually survive and thrive, even in some cases. Obviously not for everyone. Also, the other expectation or the other response was they expected most of these changes to be long lasting. And what usually, as many of you probably realize, is that when you start making investments, especially long-term investments, you're assuming things are sticking around. And so we're seeing all sorts of fairly huge investments by organizations that are going to create the infrastructure for not only now, but for when hopefully this pandemic, ceases at some point, hopefully soon. And the other question that I sort of pulled from this response was, they basically, even though obviously there's a greater virtual presence with most organizations, and some of that will go back to face when we're done with this, but they expect the virtual presence will certainly continue, greater than it did certainly before, once this pandemic has subsided. So to me, that's an important piece of why, besides the common sense reasons of why we should be focused on communication, but also just, moving forward, there seems like there will be a drive that this will continue in some form or another. So what I wanted to do just to start off was just a few different guidelines, and then we'll get into some specific topic areas. And so I've kind of broken this down into sort of general communication guidelines, and then obviously a few other tips around specific to meetings or training. So a little bit more specific forms of communication per se. So I just want to walk through a couple of different bullets on each of these and just sort of hit some highlights. One of the things when you're communicating, and again, I'm sure people are realizing this if you're actually, whether you're a team leader or a team member and you're having to communicate, frequency right now is a lot more important than duration. It's much better to check in with your team once a week for a half an hour versus, once a month for 2 hours. People appreciate, the attention. People appreciate the ability to have the conversation and to stay engaged. So one of the things we're seeing even more than we normally do is that frequency is certainly more important than duration. The other thing that I'm certainly realizing in my various roles, from facilitator, but also I am a part of a global team on a contract basis where I'm involved in working with other team members, is you have to be a lot more deliberate with your communications. Whereas, you could walk by a desk and sort of, hey, how's that program going? Or, do you have some answers for me, or whatever it might be? You actually need to, virtually reach out. And so I'm finding I'm using my calendar a lot more to put in 15-minute touch points with people than I ever had to before, because like most things, if it doesn't get into the calendar per se, usually it doesn't happen because we get caught up with other things. What I'm starting to see, and again, some of the research bears this out, is that really when we're communicating, it's okay to have a mixture of both personal and business communications. People need to know that we care about them as people. And so as opposed to just, hey, how's it going? And, and expecting the usual answer of good, move on, spending a little bit of time with people and just, really seeing how people are doing. You need a little bit of empathy to do that, which is the next bullet. The empathy really needs to shine through. The good news is that I think that empathy is a lot easier to come by because we're all in the same boat. And so even for those of you that might think, well, empathy is not a strong suit of mine, I think naturally now it does come through, but we still have to be mindful of it to be purposeful. And the other part of this is obviously make sure that everyone knows how to use the primary business tools. I mean, all of a sudden, if you're starting to use Microsoft Teams, you're starting to use Zoom, don't assume that people know how to use those. Some training sessions, some links, some mentoring, tutoring might be needed. Don't make the assumption. I've seen and witnessed that a few times. If you flip over more, and that's sort of my segue into specific meetings and trainings of communication, is when you think about creating agendas. I mean, this is not new. Creating an agenda for a meeting or a training session has been around as long as we've been doing that sort of work. But the structure now has never been more important. Again, people need that, a little bit of that structure and conformity, especially if they're working virtually, and people do really appreciate that. People do really appreciate that moving forward. Also, again, if we're doing a fair amount of meetings or training, having some ground rules about how we're going to work, as simple as, how do we use video? Do we use video? Putting people on mute like we've done even with this group. Simple things that some of us take for granted, but making sure that we have a collective agreement on an expectation of what we're doing and what we're not doing really helps those virtual meetings, really take to the next level. The third one, and again, I believe, we try to use video as much as possible. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that moving on. And we have to respect people's personal comfort level, and also if they're driving and things like that. But video does really take it to the next level of engagement. One of the things I find, certainly when we can, is using participant names generously, especially if you don't have video. Engagement is a challenge. Even with some of the more interactive types of sessions and tools that we use, we want to maintain engagement. It's hard for people to be engaged all day. And so utilizing people's names, calling on them in appropriate ways becomes really important to keep people's attention focused, but also to let them know that, that you do care about their input and their ideas. Using questions strategically. And again, it sort of goes with the last one, but again, asking just open-ended closed-ended questions are, do we agree or do we not agree? And getting a yes or a no probably isn't enough. We need to sometimes reframe our questions that force people to go a little bit deeper and to really sort of draw out information that we can work with, especially if we're doing meetings for problem solving or brainstorming or input generation. How we use questions becomes really, really important. Again, depending on the type of communication, one of the nice things, and again, we use a lot of Zoom with our organization, but there's a lot of interactive features that weren't available to us even a year or so ago. And whether it's breakout rooms and polls and all sorts of things, there's a whole host of different things that really become important. And the last thing is post-meeting documentation, planning, distribution. It's important for people to be able to see if they have action items and what they need to do to move forward. So I'm actually just going to go back because I think I jumped over a slide real quickly. And so my apologies for that. Yes, I did. I knew I was missing something, so my bad on that one. In the chat box, Liz has put in a link. And so if you could go into that chat box, and I think she's put it even in twice, if you could go into that link, it'll take you to a poll everywhere question. And if you could take a couple of moments there, let's just put it back up again. Could you take a couple moments and just, if you have to move into another browser, it literally is a one or two word response of what is your biggest virtual communication challenge that you are seeing right now. And my apologies, we should have started this first, but that's okay. We'll move it into the rest of the conversation. And there we go. We got some people logging in. Scheduling, absolutely. Scheduling, again, because we can't take communication for granted of just popping by people's desks, we need to actually schedule the communication itself. That's great. Being heard. Yeah, it's a classic conversation piece where we say, well, we're talking, but is someone actually someone listening? And so the whole idea of the active listening, building consensus. Thank you for that. Yeah, again, you can do it virtually. It just takes a lot more work. Oh, there we go. A whole bunch of things coming up now. Use of questions. Wasting people's time. Absolutely. Yeah, the usefulness. Do we actually need to have as many of these meetings as we need to? And time, right? Time's coming out, obviously more than one person. That's why that one's sort of very nice. And again, it's even things like this where you're putting this in. Using polls like this as an example is a great way to kick off meetings, some of your communication sessions. Look at just tons of stuff. Perfect. I can't even talk to each one of these. There's so many of them. Wow, that's great. Thank you for doing that. That sort of helps me even as I move forward. Sense of urgency. Well, perfect. Thanks so much. As I said, out of order, but we can still make this work. So I'm going to go back to where we were, and I'm going to move that right into our virtual etiquette. And again, when you think about it, again, I'm not going to read that quote. I'll let you take a quick look through that. Obviously, really important, right? Really important. And I mean, the good news is that really the same principles apply. Whether we're meeting in person or virtually, the whole idea of respect, consideration, and honesty for people, again, being around since we've, started organizations. The difference is, once again, is how do we actually make this work in the virtual world, which we've started to talk about with my last slide, but let's continue let's continue down this a little bit more from the inclusion perspective. I think, once again, depending on the type of meetings that you're having or communication, if you don't know the people beforehand, potentially it's a first meeting or first communication, you obviously want to review who will be at this meeting, find out their role, their experience, maybe what the expectations are if it's a training session. It becomes really important, once again, so you can connect with people and empathize, again, where they're coming from in whatever type of communication that you're doing. Things such as being aware of background and lighting for calls like this. And again, I'm not going to go too much detail into this, but again, do you want once again more of a casual environment background? That's the one that I tend to use, as you can see. Or do you want more of the green screen professional type? And again, both have their pros and cons and uses, but you need to decide on that. The importance of sending agendas out so people can prepare mentally for the meeting. I know it's tough when you have 6 a day, but again, it's always better when people have some preparation beforehand, even if it's a quick 1 minute of looking through, of seeing, okay, what's going to be expected of me at this meeting? Am I going to be expected to participate, or am I just expected to take in information? Welcome individuals as they join, if it's that type of meeting. Small talk and banter is totally fine, as long as it's appropriate. Obviously, for some of you that came on early onto this call, that's what myself and Liz were doing, and Mike as well. We were having a little bit of banter, and again, I think that's fine. It personalizes the communication. Talked a little bit earlier about the video on being ideal, and I do believe that it is in an ideal situation, but we do have to respect people's privacy and various other concerns they might have for having that on. But it does, once again, it does allow for a certain level of eye contact, and it does allow for a certain level of engagement through the eyes from the facilitator of the meeting or the leader of the meeting to the participants. We mentioned this before around ground rules to minimize surprises. I mean, even something as simple, which I have set up in the background, where I have a Wi-Fi hotspot, that if all of a sudden my internet dies, and it has done that. Actually, I was on a call with Liz where it did that I have a backup internet connection. So if you're doing a lot of these types of sessions or various types of communication where obviously internet is critical, you may want to think about a backup if that's appropriate for you. Obviously, trying to remain engaged. We've talked about that a little bit, trying to use the different functions and the importance of follow-up, just like communication would be if it was face-to-face. Again, it becomes even more important to do it in the virtual environment because people get caught up with things and they're not necessarily there within that environment where we can check in with people. So again, lots of other things, but I think these become some of the key things from an inclusiveness perspective. Honing in a little bit more specifically around virtual meetings to help keep people on track. I'm a firm believer that, if you set up virtual meetings well and you use a lot of the different engaging and interactive functions, the less people will nod off, the less people will multitask. I mean, there's going to be an element of that no matter what we do in this virtual world. But having really spent a fair amount of time on this, especially in the last 6 months, when it's planned well, and that's really the first point, when it's planned well, and you've brought in that level of engagement, it's funny how actually effective these sessions can be. So again, the importance of planning beforehand becomes really important. Being concise and deliberate instructions. And again, with this one, because it's more of a one-way communication as a webinar, excuse me, I don't have to do slides with instructions about what to do next. But if I'm running a training session or breakout sessions, I actually put the directions right in the slide. Whereas if I was in a face-to-face environment, I probably wouldn't do that because I could just tell people it. They'd ask questions, they'd nod their heads, and I could re-explain. I'm finding you actually have to be more deliberate in the actual slides about what you want people to do. And people appreciate that visual, just the visual piece of it. We've talked about the ground rules already. Again, we want to have that scribe. I think that becomes really important, whether it's yourself or someone else, especially for meetings where there's action items afterwards. And hopefully most of those types of meetings do have action items. That's one of the reasons we do meet. We should be anyways. So you do want to make sure that you capture those and send those out. And like I said, that's not new, but it becomes heightened in the virtual world. Certainly with longer meetings or training, Those short stretch breaks. I mean, my general rule is, every hour to an hour and 10 minutes, I'm giving people 5 to 10 minutes to stretch, move around, and then start right back on time. And again, we just need to do that just to get the circulation, just to get your sort of head out of staring at a computer screen, and people just need it for just a change of pace. And again, and I know I've mentioned this a couple of times, the importance of the follow-up with summary and different action items that are assigned. I'll let you take a peek at this just while I'm taking a quick drink. So what you see here is this isn't necessarily our suggestion of what the expectation and uses are. What I'm saying is if you are finding that you are working primarily in a virtual world right now, and you have to do a lot of communication, and you're using some of these tools, which most people are, whether it be email, chat, phone calls, SMS, or virtual type of meetings like Zoom or this, you need to have some expectations. And again, the ones that we have on the right side of this may not be appropriate for your organization or for your team. But really, the point of this slide is really you probably need to create some guidelines at some point, and maybe it's a shared guideline that you create with your team for those of you that might be in a team leadership role. But again, we want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. We can't automatically expect people to be checking email every hour unless that's an expectation. It may not be a realistic expectation, but at least we need to decide upon that. So, as I said over on the left-hand side, it's okay in 2021 to pick up the phone and call your colleague with a question. It doesn't always have to be email or text. And I know I found myself even doing that when I was in an office scenario, like a physical office, not a virtual office. Prior to the pandemic, and sometimes you have to give your head a shake and say, why wouldn't I just go over and have that conversation versus sending an email when the person literally sits 20 feet away from me? We sometimes lose track of just what makes common sense when we're in sort of the heat of things. So again, that's the purpose of the slide, is not to say that those expectations apply to every organization, but you should have something like this if you're using multiple channels for communication. And the last piece we'll get into before we show the video is just a little bit about virtual body language, and it's sort of thing that does virtual body language mean the same as it does in person? And I guess that's a yes and no answer, which is nice and vague. But if you look at some of the things when that are important from a virtual perspective, is one of the things is how close you're sitting to the camera and where that camera is positioned. And I mean, I have an external webcam that I use over and above my monitor, so it looks like I'm looking up a little bit, but I'm generally still looking at the screen. But where that's positioned is somewhat important, because a lot of people, especially if they're using a tablet or their phone, they have it below them, and so when they're actually doing a video call of some sort, you get a great view of people's nostrils, which isn't necessarily the most productive way to present oneself. So again, we could spend a lot of time on this, but play around with it. I mean, the nice part about any of these apps, whether it's Zoom or whatever, you can click in, your video camera comes on without any meeting setup, and you can kind of play with things. In the meeting area that I'm sitting in right now, I purposely have to play with light depending on the time of day, and you can see over to my left, I have different windows, and sometimes I have to close the shades, open the blinds, different lighting. I have a small light in front of me. You want backlit generally, or not backlit, you want lit in front of you, not behind you, as a general rule. And those sort of things. So again, we go in a lot more detail, but that body language is important for not only the presenter, but also for participants, but probably one would argue even more important for someone who's presenting. This happens a lot. Now, I don't do this myself, but Liz, who was online when one of our first sessions together, she alerted me to something that I did, which was I stick my tongue out a lot when I'm doing these types of sessions. Now, the good news is you haven't seen that today, because I just keep talking, and so I can't do that. But in a more virtual training environment where I'm sitting back and listening to other people, it's something I have to be careful about. At the end of the day, it's not the end of the world, these types of things, but they do, once again, sometimes convey things that we don't want it to convey, and it can be distracting to others. I've somewhat talked about this already, about the importance of eye contact. I do believe that, and that's one of the reasons I personally really like the video, and I try to encourage it where, again, where appropriate, given my audience. But I think it really does bring another level of engagement when you can actually see people and you can see their faces. The importance of smiling. You know, we don't do enough of it. Some could argue in the last 9 months we haven't had a heck of a lot to smile about. You know what? It's just a case of rethinking our mindset at times. Focus. Once again, if all of a sudden I start to move away and I start to check my email, which I'm doing right now, I'm exaggerating to make a point. People can see that. It might be important, and I think that's okay. We have to check emails, but it's okay if you send a quick chat note to someone, for example, to the presenter, say, sorry, there's a couple things have come up. I may be looking away. I know for me, sometimes when I have a dual screen or a third computer going, I have to end up looking over to my left or right for a while. And if I do a fair amount of that, I let people know that that's what I'm doing. And I'm just checking something on another computer to make sure that the visual is coming through correctly. So it's okay to do this sort of thing. Just, you know, I think it's a little bit of the etiquette piece, going back to that you let the presenter, facilitator, or even your peers know about that. And again, you know, the whole idea, as I mentioned earlier, you can practice this in front of a webcam without an audience to sort of get the proper lighting, the proper distance, the eye contact, all of that stuff. You can spend a bit of time, and with a little bit of nuancing, you usually can figure it out. So I'd like to finish this piece off before we open up the Q&A in about 5 or 6 minutes, just with a short video. It's been around for a few years, but I think it really does a nice job of what some of us have to deal with in our video conference calls. So hopefully we tested the sound beforehand. Really important to do those sort of things. I think it should come through. So hopefully everyone can hear this. And again, it's about 3.5 minutes. And so I'm going to start it, and then I'll probably turn it back at that point to Liz to open up for some Q&A. So.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for being here on time. Paul? Hey, Paul, can you hear me? I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hey, guys.
Hey, Tyler.
Sorry I'm late. Having a hard time connecting.
1 second. I'm having a sound issue.
I can't hear you. Try adjusting your output settings.
Can you hear me? Are you on hotel Wi-Fi?
Yeah, why?
Never mind, I got it. I just had to change a few settings.
Great. Maybe we can get
started.
started. Oh, great.
I think your mic is
My mic?
Do you have headphones?
You want me to put them on?
No, I want you to smell them. No, Hey, Beth.
Hey everyone, sorry I'm late. I had to download a new version of the platform.
You should plan extra time for the updates. There's pretty much one every time.
Sounds like someone just joined.
Hey guys, it's John. I had to call in. I'm stuck in traffic. Have I missed anything yet?
No, it would have been nice for you to join the rest of us. We'll see you when you get home. All right, while everyone is here, finally, Tyler, do you have that financial report?
Well, it's been the last few weeks updating our books, and I got some great news for you. Schedule from this point last year. We had a great Q1.
Lost Tyler, I think.
Am I frozen?
Hey, Trip, I think we lost Tyler.
Yeah, I know, we lost Tyler.
Hey guys, it sounded like Tyler was cutting out.
We know, John. All right, while we wait on Tyler, why don't we go over all of the reports from Beth, are you with us?
Oh yeah.
Okay, everyone, I know some of you have to leave soon, but I just wanted to go over a couple of the curious reports. Oh, okay, excuse me. My wife's out of town this week. Daddy's, I'm so sorry. Okay, you just spilt grape juice on the carpet. Daddy is in a meeting. Tyler, can you go over the numbers one more time, please?
I thought Beth had an adjustment. Hey, Beth.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, that's my iTunes.
Hey guys, hang on. I'm gonna join in. Hey, what platform are you guys on? Skype? FaceTime?
It's in the invite.
Oh, never mind. I see it. It's right there in the invite.
Okay, now I can see everybody. Let's reschedule and let's just do a regular old conference call, okay? Paul, can you have David send out the 9-digit passcode?
I heard you. Yeah, he's been here the whole time.
All right, everybody. See you later. Like a lot of it.
Okay. Okay. So hopefully everyone was able to hear that okay, because it really does, I think it really does tell us a little bit about, we've all experienced this before, I'm sure, in the last 9 months, various elements of that, if not all of them, as we move forward. So I've put up here just a number of resources. And once again, as Liz had mentioned, there'll be some things that'll be sent out to people that where you'll have these. And again, if you want to dig a little bit deeper. And at that point, I think I'll pass it back over to Liz.
Thank you, Tony. And thank you as well for everything that you covered today. One point that you made, and I noticed it did come up several times, is talking about ground rules and how important that is, and just making sure everybody is aware of the expectations. And so that was one of the biggest takeaways for me. And I know in conversations I've had is giving license to actually just phone someone if you have a question, not having to always schedule a call or a meeting. So if this topic, if you found it interesting and you wanted to dive a little bit deeper, as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, we do have a micro course coming up on January 26th. It's a 2-hour course with Tony. Again, talking more about digital communication and active listening skills. So feel free to reach out if you would like some more information about that. Otherwise, we do offer some additional training, coaching, virtual courses, self-paced online courses, and then of course there's this webinar series which will be taking place all year long, one webinar per month. So without further ado, we're just going to open up the floor. We've got a few minutes here in case anyone has any specific questions or any general questions on virtual communication. We will stay on the line for a few minutes. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining. Excuse me. And Tony, there is a question that came up in the chat box. It is from Jose saying, is there an indicator available on how much the productivity has been impacted by working remotely or virtually?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, I don't know of any specific research study. It's one of the things that I'm actually looking for myself. I just go sort of anecdotally. Oops. Sorry, I just sort of looking anecdotally from some of the experiences that I've had and people that I've talked to in various leadership positions as well as team member positions. And again, I'm getting mixed results. I think a part of it depends on function. I do some work on a regular basis at a manufacturing facility, and obviously, virtual is next to impossible, but there are some roles that can go virtual and from a designer perspective or partial. And there seems to be some concerns around productivity, but I've also worked with some other groups that are sort of non-production based, and they're saying, as long as you have the right structure, the right software that you're going to use for some of our team communications, then it actually can go up dramatically. So again, it's one of the things that I'm looking for is actually some empirical evidence. So again, I'm hearing different things. I think it goes back though, if we really do want to be productive, we just have to make sure that we've got the infrastructure sort of in place in terms of expectations, software, programs, and that people are on the same page from a learning and expectation perspective. So hopefully that helps. I don't know, Liz, if there's anything even from your perspective you wanted to add in from your world, but.
Sure. It's interesting because before this webinar, I just read a blog post from ABC on this particular topic, and they were saying how, now this is from a corporate perspective, office work, that they found that people are becoming much more productive. So a 50-hour work week, when you take into account with commuting and everything, in reality, working from home or working virtually equates to 25 hours of actual work. And that's because there's less distractions, there's less motion going on between one space to another, less socializing. So people are still getting the work done, but just in this instance, in half the time. So,
Right.
but again, there weren't specific metrics to show that data. It was just from a blog post, but I think it's definitely something interesting in looking into.
For sure. You're welcome. You're welcome, Jose.
So if there aren't any further questions, we will close up. We will stop the meeting for now, and feel free to reach out to us anytime. We would love to hear from you. And oh, sorry, I spoke too soon. We have a few more questions coming in. So Tony,
That's okay.
the first question is, any tips on how to ask for groups feedback on a topic? I feel often it goes silent when I ask a group question. And the second question is, since virtual means technology, does the headset impact the communication? Its use could reinforce the virtual rules apply, but do we want to minimize tech?
Right, right. So I go back to the first question. Sorry, again, my memory span is low at this point of the day. The first question, again, briefly, that was around
Group feedback.
Right, right. And so, I think it goes, and again, it's hard to get into too much detail just in this forum, but again, how we ask questions. It's something I talk about when I also teach some virtual facilitation programs. And it's one of the things we get into, we do some exercises on around the importance of thinking about how you phrase questions. Some people are naturally very good at this and other people aren't, quite honestly. And so it's putting people through what are some 3 or 4 techniques that you can use and get good at, and eventually they become more natural for you. So how we ask questions. But the other thing with feedback is even as simple as you notice my poll question. And doing some polls can really be helpful. Again, you have to think about them a little bit in advance. But generally speaking, if you want some feedback on something, most people are quite fine with keying in some things. And there you're getting feedback. You may not be getting it verbally, but you're getting it written. So I would say, between question and the use of some of the polling, that's 2 quick tips. The next one was around the headsets and the use of from a virtual perspective. I think it's a personal preference. I like the headset. Liz doesn't wear a headset necessarily. She finds it works well. Depends a little bit on your setup. I have a good friend of mine that I've been starting to do some video blogs and logs with, and he uses a microphone. He has a really spanking beautiful microphone that he uses, and that works for him. So for me, I tend to have background noise like I have right now a little bit with little ones running around. I'm finding the headsets I can use a little bit and mute easier. So I think it becomes a little bit of a personal preference. I don't know, Liz, if you wanted to add anything to that, because again, you don't use the headset as much. So
Sure. Two things just to add there. Also to your question on group feedback, Tony, 100% agree different ways that you can engage people. But I think it also begins with creating that safe and inclusive space before the meeting really gets going. If people feel comfortable, if they feel right away that they're included, that they're seen, that can also increase your chance of them feeling confident enough and that they're going to want to offer some feedback. As for tech, personally, I just don't like it on my head. That's why I don't use a headset. But yes, it could certainly be that visual reinforcement that it is a virtual meeting, so virtual rules apply. The only thing I've noticed at times on different meetings is when the speaker or people that are using headsets fiddle with it too much, and that noise sometimes becomes a bit distracting if they're touching their microphone too much. So again, but that's all part of setting those ground rules right from the get-go.
For sure. And I said, I'm one of the, I used to be, even 3 months ago, I was a worse offender with the touching and the moving and whatever. And you sort of learn after doing it, and you sort of train yourself not to do those things. So great.
I think everyone right now perhaps could benefit from some stage training, learning how your hands move when you're touching your hair, because these are often things that we don't even do consciously and we're not aware of until someone is standing there pointing it out to you.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
So thank you once again, everyone. We do have a couple more minutes if any other questions come in through the chat window. But once again, we are very happy that you've come to join us. I know there were a lot of familiar faces, some new faces that came onto the webinar today. So please feel free to reach out anytime if you have any questions, and we hope that you will consider the upcoming micro course on January 26th with Tony. So have a great afternoon.